What we're gonna do right here is go back, way back into time, when the only people that existed were troglodytes, cavemen, cave women, Neanderthal, troglodytes. Let's take the average caveman at home.
This is side 2, July 21st, 1978, tape number 339. Everything is coming together so beautifully in my research now. I'm wondering whether I'm just gushing with an information overload or whether all the loose ends now are being fit into the piece of the puzzle. I really think a lot of the answers of who held back the research and where the research really should be going into the assassinations and the overthrow of this country, the suppression of it versus the facts, has been a strong point in my mind to try and cover why we're driving a car full speed with the brakes on, and who has the brakes, how did the media create these people, and how can we move them out of the way in order to get these truths out in our lifetime. And of course I keep accumulating new books and new articles, just searching and searching for the answers. And my friend Lydia Blades, who did a couple of shows with me on Dialogue Conspiracy, went to San Francisco last week and came back with an amazing book that I never owned and never knew about. And I'm giving you the bibliography here so you can locate it. She paid a lot of money for it. It was published in New York City in 1947, July 1947, by a man edited by Herbert Moore and James Barrett, with an introduction by W.F. Heimlich. It's edited. It isn't written. I was going to say it's written by a man by the name of Herbert Moore. It's put together by American and British intelligence, and with official reports of Russian intelligence on the death of Adolf Hitler. And of course, some of this from American intelligence I put at arm's distance. Some of this book I accept and some I reject. But parts of it are very, very interesting. And I want to share it with you and give you the bibliography here. I want as many of you to look for it and locate it if you can. I'll pay you back if you can find it. I've copied her book. It's not that long, and I have copied it so that I never lose track of it. But if ever you find it, it's put out by Book Tab Press in New York, 1947. And if you can find it for me, I'll reimburse you. I'd appreciate having one copy of my own. You know, I've done one show on Dialogue Conspiracy on the National Police Gazette issue. I've given you that address if you want to order it. The entire issue is called Hitler is Alive. And I've referred to the UFO, the book on one of the tapes. You already have that address of UFO, Hitler's Secret Weapon. I got a letter today from a researcher in Taos, New Mexico, who reminded me that the author of the UFO book about Hitler being alive is a Nazi, and I've gotten this from other sources living in Canada who published the book. Well, I can't argue with the fact that, say, a Nazi now is saying Hitler's alive. That has nothing to do with the fact that there were mysteries about his death, and everybody who's exposing it, if the Birch Society is exposing the Metrocats, the Labor Party is exposing the Trilateral Commission, and we are on the brink of a war, and if even a Nazi is telling the world that Hitler is alive, it's up to the rest of the world to find out what in the heck is going on. Hitler wrote Mein Kampf. That's like saying, the same logic of saying, well, don't believe Mein Kampf because a Nazi wrote it. Just believe what an American author writes, or a Frenchman, or an Englishman. Tell me the difference. Hitler said, this is what I'm going to do, and this is what he did. And therefore, whether Nazis are publishing these books or not isn't the important thing. But the important thing is, what was the mystery about Hitler's so-called death, and who created the death. And the thing that's important for me that runs all through this book and entirely through this entire book called Who Killed Hitler, with all of the allegations and the information about the possibility that Hitler is still alive or left Germany at that time, the entire basis of the Western world accepting the Hitler story, the entire basis was put out by Trevor Roper, the Englishman. And Trevor Roper wrote a report in November of 1945 that became a book called The Last Days of Hitler by H.R. Trevor Roper. Now, we know Trevor Roper as an English writer, and I know him more by saying that he wrote the introduction to Mark Lane's book, Rush to Judgment. And this is terribly important for the work that I've done, because it was first Penn Jones Jr. in Texas that called attention that Mr. Murchison, the Texas oilman, had a large controlling stock in Holt Reinhardt that published Mark Lane's book, Rush to Judgment. And I've accused Mark Lane publicly, privately, of holding back the investigation of the assassinations, and I have accused him constantly of pressing the information of Clay Shaw in the OSS meeting with Reinhard Gehlen, chief of Hitler's intelligence, the Nazis, of suppressing the Michael Payne connections to Walter Dornberger, the Nazi war criminal at Bell Aerospace, the link of Lee Harvey Oswald with the Nazis, and Albert Osborne in the Mexico connections with the CIA. And I've accused Lane of hiding the Alexander Zeiger, Argentine, Lee Harvey Oswald connections, Marina Oswald, the CIA, Nazi connections from Argentine to the Minsk radio factory, to the U-2, to downing the U-2 at the time of détente of Khrushchev and President Eisenhower. I had a flyer made out in 1976, which I enclose in letters wherever I can. If you don't happen to own one, send me a self-addressed stamped envelope and I'll send it to you. It's called World World Nazis, Walter Dornberger, Michael Payne, Lee Harvey Oswald, General Reinhard Gehlen, Clay Shaw, and Alan Dulles. And it begins, there's two sentences I wrote. Why have Mark Lane, Bernard Fensterwald, George O'Toole, Robert Sam Anson, and the Boston-based Assassination Information Bureau and the other researchers around Mark Lane protected the Nazi links to the John Kennedy assassination? How is it that Sherman Skolnick in Chicago, Jim Garrison in New Orleans, and myself, who found those Nazi agents from World War II working with Clay Shaw, Lee Harvey Oswald, and Michael Payne, are discredited and called mentally sick and crazy? Why do they hide the Payne connections to Dornberger, the Dornberger-von Braun connections to the assassination, the Bell Aerospace links, the Clay Shaw links, the links of the entire Russian Solidarist Nazi connections with Lee and Marina Oswald, the Nazis from a Young Americans for Freedom that came from Germany to form the YAF with Robert Morris in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, the Gehlen spies in the United States? How is it that Mark Lane, the leader of this great Kennedy assassination story, was the first one to get a book out that's on all the bookshelves? He's called by the CBS, the major media, when they want to talk down the assassinations or put down the assassinations. He's the man who set up that committee in Washington, D.C., and then left town and moved into an apartment out in California while the congressional committees are going, who has suppressed these Nazis. And when you see that Trevor Roper was writing the introduction, wrote it to his book, you don't see on the book stands of the assassinations Thomas Buchanan's book, Who Killed Kennedy, Leo Savage's book, The Kennedy, or Paris Flamon's Kennedy Conspiracy, Leo Savage's book on the assassination, Joe Jostin's book, Harold Weisberg's 5 books, Whitewashes, or Penn Jones Jr., his books, Forgive My Grief. None of these sit on library shelves, maybe one or two, or the bookstores. They are always suppressed. The story was never meant to get out. Only Mark Lane is associated with the investigation of John Kennedy. On the front cover of his book is the introduction of Trevor Roper. But what he doesn't say, and what you didn't know, was that in 1945, U. Trevor Roper was chief of British intelligence. He was a British intelligence officer in Berlin, and that he was the sole perpetuator of the story of Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun committing suicide and having themselves cremated, ordering their cremation, the phony marriage story at the last moment between them. This was given to U. Trevor Roper. He worked with Goebbels, the minister of propaganda with Adolf Hitler. And Goebbels and Roper got out the story that Adolf Hitler was dead, and that's the one that has been perpetuated around the world all of this time. In the fly cover on both sides of this book, the fly sheet, Who Killed Hitler, edited by Herbert Moore and James Barrett, it said, "It is a fortunate coincidence for the reading public that the untold story of Hitler's mysterious death is being published at the same time as the official version. If this were not so, millions would go on believing the unsupportable story of suicide and cremation, which British intelligence constructed out of incomplete facts and half-truths. The publication of Who Killed Hitler goes into work of U.S. intelligence and private intelligence sources. The reason why 45% of the people believe Hitler is still alive will not appear strange. This was in 1947. If one reads the British report elaborated called The Last Days of Hitler by Chief Intelligence Officer of the U.S. Army in Berlin, ℌ𝔞𝔫𝔕. He sums up and challenges Trevor Roper and says there is not one shred of evidence to prove that Hitler died by suicide. No up-to-date report on Hitler's death could be thorough that omits the findings of Russian intelligence agents who entered Hitler's bunker 50 feet below the ground." And it goes into the fact that these men went into the Russian reports, and then there's a copy of the Russian reports. The first report said they had the body, and then later they denied it and did not have Adolf Hitler's body. Chapter 18 of Who Killed Hitler has a section called The American Private Intelligence Report. None of the Allied military intelligence reports on the last days of the Nazi Berlin answered the question of who killed Hitler. The British reporter, under the name of Major H.R. Trevor Roper, accepts the Nazi propaganda version. That's the man who wrote the introduction to Lane's book. Accepted the Nazi version. Trevor Roper sticks to that legend that was originated and publicized by Dr. Goebbels, the minister of propaganda, that Hitler and his bride, Eva Braun, ended their lives and were cremated in the Chancellery Garden. The several Russian reports shifted from suicide cremation theory to the possible escape and then the discrepancy, leaving the main question still unsolved, namely the circumstances of death. The escape and disappearance theory, though widely believed, comes without any independent investigation, and it is simply a Hitler legend. The British did not begin their investigation of Hitler mystery until 5 months after his death. In the foreword of the book, Chief Intelligence Officer for the U.S. Army in Berlin said, "I was assigned to find Adolf Hitler or his body immediately upon the entry of American troops into Berlin, and I state positively I didn't find Hitler or his physical remains. Despite a thorough search of the area, we have found no evidence that the body was burned, and you cannot locate any person who witnessed the last days of the Chancellery. Because of the activities of British and American intelligence were carried on a joint basis, it was personally astounding to learn that British Major H.R. Trevor Roper issued what was purported to be an official account of Hitler's last days without ever consulting any American colleagues. During my stay in Berlin, I lived with the Chief of British Intelligence. I shared their knowledge of the experts on the probable fate. I cannot overstress the fact that I have never been able to find any reliable witness of Hitler's activities after April 22, 1945, 9 days before the date of his supposed suicide. Under these circumstances, I could never understand on what basis Trevor Roper based his official British intelligence report. He wrote it November the 1st, 1945, and This was when the bomb crater in the garden of the Reich Chancellery went off, and the area wasn't even evacuated or excavated for investigation until December the 12th, 1945, 7 months after the surrender of Berlin. I feel that the melodramatic fabrication that was advanced by Dr. Goebbels and accepted in toto by Major Trevor Roper, the theory of suicide by Hitler and Eva Braun, followed by cremation, is impossible. The stories told by the two SS guards, ℌ𝔞𝔫𝔦𝔣 and Erich Mansfield, is not plausible or credible. Both were unreliable. They're not familiar with the area or the bunker layout. When questioned thoroughly, they betrayed their lack of knowledge, even the direction of the entrance of the bunker. It is the opinion of qualified experts that you can't completely destroy a human body, burn it in the open air without a trace of a single ash, and this was what happened in the case of Adolf Hitler. Despite the search, I've never been able to find any evidence to support that theory of love and marriage of Hitler and Eva Braun. That story was created of their actions between April 26th and April 9th, was told by a German woman aviator, Hannah Reich, and it does not jive with reliable sources, and it can be easily discredited. My own conclusion, this is the introduction to this book, written July 5th, 1947, is that after April 22nd, 1945, everything is a mystery as far as Hitler's fate is concerned, and that mystery will linger until the corpse of Adolf Hitler has been found and certified beyond any doubt. Then the book goes into private intelligence report again, how the Allied military intelligence, the last days of the Berlin capture, were confused. The British report, again, was written by Major A.R. Trevor Roper, who accepted this Nazi propaganda, and there were glaring defects in the British intelligence investigation. He said it became more and more apparent on the anniversary of Hitler's death that the legends of his escape and survival would reappear. Now, this was written in 1947, and on the anniversary of Adolf Hitler's death in April of this year, of 1978, Mr. Wagner, the head of the Treblinka and the other concentration camp in Poland, responsible for over 1 million deaths, was arrested at a birthday party for Adolf Hitler. Now, that was written up in the New York Times as being a birthday party for Adolf Hitler. It didn't say in commemoration of his birthday or the late Adolf Hitler. In the book, Who Killed Hitler, he goes on again on November the 1st, 1945, British Major H.R. Trevor Roper issued a report without, again, ever consulting the U.S. intelligence. Trevor Roper was not the officer originally assigned to evaluate the British findings. He came in as a volunteer on September the 9th, 1945, at the suggestion of a friend. You remember that as soon as John Kennedy was killed, Mark Lane flew immediately to Dallas as a volunteer to help that Russian widow, to show her in America how kindly and great we are. And Marina Oswald sent a message, I don't need him, my husband was guilty. Mark Lane had a few verbal contacts and saw Marguerite Oswald, who said my son was an agent, and Mark Lane does not work with Marguerite Oswald. He's never written a book about her information. He's not interested in what she knows. He now has Grace Stevens staying with him in Santa Monica, California, a witness to the Martin Luther King assassination, where James Earl Ray stayed at the rooming house. But when I saw this about Trevor Roper, and I thought about Mark Lane going right to Europe and writing a book on the assassination without possibly going through the 26 volumes, I think of how he volunteered to come out and help Marina Oswald, and how for 15 years he suppressed this information. And I knew in time, as we follow these pieces, the mystery of Mark Lane, who Mark Lane is, where he came from, and why he's doing this, will all fall into place. Remember, it's only been 14 years since John Kennedy was killed, and as long as I live, I have endless patience, and I hope those who take these tapes, duplicate these tapes, and send them to friends and relatives and the news media, and ask about Trevor Roper. With this in mind, I reread his introduction to Rush to Judgment, and I went through Mark's book again, just really quickly to see if he were a deep cover agent and were perpetuating this Oswald story, why at this time and how much information were they giving out? If Trevor Roper was an officer in British intelligence in the 40s, and he's writing in 1964 in Mark Lane's book, what did he say in the introduction? Did he give any information? And the thrust of the introduction is Lee Harvey Oswald couldn't be found guilty in a court of law. Lee Harvey Oswald, the evidence wasn't against him. The Warren Commission tried him and sentenced him, and Jack Ruby killed him, and that given a new trial, Lee Harvey Oswald would be innocent of the crime. Now, all of that is wonderful because I believe Lee Harvey Oswald is innocent of the crime. I also believe that Lee Harvey Oswald's double could be and was substituted, and that's a different subject, when the shooting took place in the Dallas police basement. I believe that John Wilkes Booth was able to escape after the Lincoln assassination. His body wasn't found, and the various conspirators were hung, and Booth went to India. I believe that's possible as new information's come out. I believe the Russian Tsar's family could be allowed to leave, and no traces of their body were found. I believe one of the biggest stories in the country, a book to write up, is the hoax burials or the substitutes for, say, John Wilkes Booth, the Tsar's remains, Adolf Hitler's remains, the Howard Hughes remains, the Lee Harvey Oswald burial, and go into some of these grand escapes and how these situations are perpetuated. And it could be that Mark Lane's working to find Lee Harvey Oswald innocent so that when he comes back, his record would be clear. But getting back to the book, Who Killed Hitler, I won't be able, naturally, on 1/2 hour of a tape to go into much of it, and I hope you can get it. If not, I may do part 2 of the tape next week on some more of this book, because it does say, it describes Trevor Roper, and the way his investigation of the killing of Hitler is identical to the Warren Commission investigation, although it's less complicated. He comes out with a book, similar to the way the Warren Commission came out with their book, sloppy investigation of a homicide. It said Trevor Roper was not originally assigned, but he was recommended. Somebody told him to volunteer at the suggestion of a friend. Not mentioned who the friend was in 1945, but we do have books and documents now that from 1943 on, the Nazis were getting ready to settle and move around the world and were getting ready for the takeover. So they may have had a good friend suggest how to investigate this death. It said, although it was a complex task to investigate the death of Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun, Trevor Roper made a hasty study of the evidence already compiled by British intelligence. He dashed off his own conclusions. He spent 7 weeks issuing what became the official intelligence report on the death of Hitler. He skipped essential eyewitness testimony. He displayed a gross ignorance of the full names of key persons. Worst of all, it is revealed by Mr. Heimlich that no evacuation was done in the bomb crater until after his book was out. He came out in November, and the evacuation of this bomb crater took place December the 12th, 1945. Thus, Trevor Roper wrote the official British report without even examining the site of the pretended burial. Asian American authorities, according to the authors of this book, might have overcome their initial handicap to a large extent if they had instituted immediate and thorough investigation into Hitler's death and not merely using military intelligence. This is the same military intelligence, of course, that set up Adolf Hitler and was allowing the Nazis to escape. And this author is wondering why they didn't go into it immediately and thoroughly. Why didn't they use historians, regular historians, but they used instead military intelligence agents or historians from Army duty? Does that sound like the Warren report where Otto Winokur from Germany maybe still is, the chief historian of the Pentagon, and they sent in Mr. Coakley and Goldberg from the Army? Well, Adolf Hitler's death was investigated by the military and the historians from the Army, and well-trained specialists in the sciences of collecting evidence and interrogating and cross-examining witnesses were not used. And of course, that was used, the same pattern of the autopsy of John Kennedy and the investigation of the car, the writing of Lee Harvey Oswald on the diary, the body of Lee Harvey Oswald that was exhumed and cremated by orders of the Warren Commission, a duplication of the same pattern done by the same persons. Now, this author says instead of being quick and precise and cross-examining and interrogating and collecting, the slow start in investigating Hitler and the uncoordinated effort made it possible for the Russians to preserve their initial advantage, and future they could open up the rebirth of Nazi mythology and Hitler worship. Now, what these authors are claiming, and of course a lot in their book I don't take so seriously, but the Trevor Roper material and the way that Hitler's death was investigated can be looked up and documented. What they're saying in this book is that because the British were so sloppy and Trevor Roper was so sloppy, the story of Adolf Hitler being alive could be perpetuated by the Russians. But take that one step further. Is everyone a communist who says, like Mae Brussell now, let's go to the Antarctica and see if Adolf lived? Let's call these public officials, Mr. Colby, Richard Helms, James Angleton. Some of them, many of them are still alive, that were running the CIA then. The OSS became the CIA. Let's find out. Walter Dornberg, I believe, is alive. We know Werner von Braun is dead. But there are many, many people that could be called and challenged. Even Richard Nixon's law offices that brought in the head of the Odessa, Alexander ℌ𝔞𝔫𝔕 in 1950, and then down to Argentina to continue the network of Nazis. This book, Who Killed Hitler, has a section on the American intelligence. It has a section on British intelligence and Russia. And then it continues again on the official British report. It says the British intelligence lapped in their miscalculations. The slip nearly cost Britain freedom once when they were going into Hitler's strategy. Their second big miscalculation of British intelligence is all too apparent in the official report of Major H.R. Trevor Roper. He didn't spend enough time. This is like the Warren report. He had the facilities to get the whole story, again like the Warren report. Instead, he brought back an essay of probabilities. Now, that's what Mark Lane was accusing the Warren Commission of doing, an essay of probabilities. And yet the man who wrote the introduction to his book has been accused of hiding the most heinous possible escape on planet Earth. What will be the consequences to the minds of democracy? They asked in 1947. The legend of Hitler dying a hero in the bunker brought a lot of satisfaction to some people that he was tucked away. But the ghost of Hitler is already walking. Many headline-fed people in Europe and America now will be expecting that Fuhrer to be talking, shouting, rallying in a new plot against humanity. Much of the blame for the affairs will be on Trevor Roper for his ineffectual efforts. Americans might have done a better job, but they relegated this to their British comrades in arms. The Russian intelligence agents had a golden opportunity to get the real facts before the trail of Dr. Goebbels' stagehands and accomplices had grown cold. But the Red agents also bungled it badly. And I wonder if Reinhard Gehlen was waiting 2 years and they were setting up the decline of Germany with orders, stall the war until we get further established, in this country and around the world. If the very Russians who bungled this investigation were the Gehlen agents behind the line, in charge also for suppressing some of this information. It says the ghost of Hitler is stalking the world. The consequence of Trevor Roper report was handed to a curious, dubious world as the last word, the full and complete official intelligence report on the death of Adolf Hitler. The Allied Supreme Headquarters bought it, hand in glove. A book came out, $3, called The Last Days of Adolf Hitler. It was released to an already confused public. I must now try to get Trevor Roper's book on the death of Adolf Hitler his version, and also this new book, Who Killed Hitler?